Look up at the majestic spires of an Imperial Hive City. You see monuments of gold and plasteel piercing the clouds, testaments to humanity's enduring dominance in Warhammer for OK. But this is a lie built on a foundation of rotting flesh and forgotten souls. Now, shift your gaze downward, past the smog, past the roaring factorums, deep into the lightless bowels where the Emperor's grace has never shone. Welcome to the savage reality of surviving an Imperial Underhive. Before we descend further into this lightless abyss, make sure you are prepared for the darkness. If you want to survive the grim realities of the Warhammer for OK universe, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We decode the darkest lore of the 41st millennium, dragging the horrifying truth into the light. Now, check your weapons, hold your breath, and let us plunge into the depths where humanity goes to rot. Imagine a world without the sky. Your entire existence is bounded by crushing walls of rusted iron and leaking toxic pipes. There is no day or night here, only the perpetual, flickering gloom of dying lumen strips. The air you breathe is a suffocating cocktail of chemical fumes, recycled sweat, and the unmistakable stench of decay. This is not a prison. This is simply home for billions of forgotten citizens at the absolute bottom of the imperial machine. While the nobles in the upper spires sip fine amasec and debate planetary politics, the denizens of the Underhive are fighting tooth and nail for a single drop of irradiated water. To them, the wider Imperium is a myth. Space marines, alien invasions, even the God Emperor himself, these are just bedtime stories whispered in the dark. The only reality is the rust, the crushing cold, and the predatory eyes watching you from the shadows. Down here, you are not a citizen, you are prey. The Underhive is a graveyard of forgotten centuries, a structural nightmare where the ruins of ancient domes slowly collapse under their own colossal weight. To survive a single cycle requires a calculated savagery that would make even a feral orc hesitate. You do not truly live in the Underhive. You merely exist, waiting for the shadows to finally claim what little flesh you have left. To understand the Underhive, you must first understand its anatomy. This is not a planned subterranean level. It is a graveyard of architectural failures. Over thousands of years, the immense weight of the upper spires crushes the foundational domes, causing them to collapse and compact. You are walking through the compressed skeletons of forgotten industrial eras. Every jagged bulkhead and rusted gantry is a testament to the Imperium's complete disregard for structural preservation when lives are infinitely cheaper. The terrain is an incomprehensible labyrinth of twisted plasteel and shattered ferrocrete. Navigating this environment is a lethal puzzle. Bottomless chasms suddenly open beneath your feet, dropping into unseen depths where the echo of a falling rock is never heard. Entire sectors are precariously suspended by ancient, groaning cables. A wrong step here does not just result in injury. It means disappearing into a lightless void, consumed by the crushing mass of the Hive City above. Now imagine the suffocating atmosphere. There is no fresh air, only the vented exhaust of 1,000 manufactorums raining down from the upper levels. The smog is so thick it leaves a bitter, metallic taste on your tongue and coats your lungs in toxic ash. Light is an unimaginable luxury. The only illumination comes from ancient, dying lumen strips or the sickly glow of radioactive waste. This darkness is a living, breathing entity, perfectly concealing the horrors waiting within. If you descend deep enough, you will eventually reach the sump. This is the absolute nadir of the Hive, a vast, subterranean ocean of chemical runoff, untreated sewage, and corrosive heavy metals. The sump is a nightmare of industrial pollution, a highly acidic sea that constantly churns with mutated leviathans. Yet, horrifyingly, for millions of Underhivers, this toxic sludge is the only available source of moisture. It is a desperate choice between dying of thirst or dying of poisoning. In this architecture of despair, clean water is a mythological concept. Every single drop consumed has been recycled 1,000 times over, drawn from condensation extractors, harvested sweat, or filtered through the most rudimentary purifiers. Even after filtration, the water carries a heavy burden of heavy metals and radioactive isotopes. Staying hydrated is a constant gamble with systemic organ failure, a slow degradation of your body simply to buy another miserable day of existence in the dark. You are living in a state of terminal claustrophobia, surrounded by the physical decay of history. The monumental statues of forgotten imperial saints are now horribly mutated by toxic mold, their stone faces weeping acidic tears. These ruined shrines no longer offer spiritual salvation. They merely provide tactical cover for the brutal gang ambushes that define daily life. The architecture itself forces a violent intimacy, trapping you in tight, rusted corridors where running is impossible and fighting is inevitable. Consider this: when the physical world you inhabit is actively attempting to dissolve, crush, or poison you, how does humanity adapt? The environment shapes the soul. In a realm constructed entirely of discarded refuse and lethal If you look closely at the Underhive, you realize it is not merely a society in decay. It is a thriving, horrific alternative ecosystem. In the upper spires, the Adeptus Arbites enforce the strict laws of the Lex Imperialis. Down here, that law is a meaningless fiction. There are no enforcers waiting to protect you, no emergency vox channels to call for help. The only true authority is the crude, undeniable weight of a stub gun or the rusted edge of a scavenged chain blade. In the absence of the Emperor's peace, a new social contract has evolved, forged entirely in blood and terror. The ecosystem is dominated by brutal gang syndicates, acting as apex predators and makeshift feudal lords. They control the vital choke points of survival, functioning water stills, stable trade routes, and breathable air vents. To exist independently is a death sentence. You must either align yourself with these violent factions, trading your loyalty for a meager semblance of protection, or perish immediately. Human gangers are far from the only threat lurking in this lightless labyrinth. The Underhive is teeming with an ecology of nightmare creatures birthed from millennia of toxic exposure. Giant, mutated arachnids spin razor-sharp webs across forgotten archways, waiting to snare unwary scavengers. Some crocs, colossal reptilian beasts mutated by chemical runoff, drag their armored bodies through the corrosive sludge, hunting anything that moves. You are surrounded by a food chain that views human flesh as a convenient protein source. Consider the terrifying reality of human gene degradation. After thousands of years trapped in a radioactive, lightless environment, the human form begins to fundamentally break down. You see it in the pale skin of the deep sump dwellers, their eyes swollen and sensitive to light. This is forced, reverse evolution. The Imperium demands absolute genetic purity, but the Underhive aggressively rewards mutation if it grants a survival advantage. To survive the dark, you must slowly surrender the very traits that make you human. The floor of this abyss is just as lethal as its fauna. Without sunlight, traditional plant life is impossible. Instead, the damp, rotting walls are choked with bioluminescent fungi and toxic molds. Some growths can be harvested and processed into crude narcotics or basic nutrient pastes. However, others release invisible, highly acidic spores capable of melting through standard rebreather masks. Every single surface you touch, every breath you take, is a microscopic war for your continued biological existence. Paranoia, therefore, is not a psychological disorder down here. It is the most vital survival mechanism you possess. Trust is a luxury, that will get you killed before the next cycle. You sleep with a weapon clutched to your chest, listening to the metallic groans of shifting bulkheads and agonizing screams echoing through ventilation shafts. If you hear a scuttling sound in the dark, you do not investigate. You raise your weapon and pray to an emperor who has forgotten you. Now pause and consider the sheer, crushing weight of this existence. If you are fascinated by the terrifying depths of Warhammer for OK lore and want to uncover more dark truths, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. Your support fuels our ongoing descent into the grim darkness of the far future, allowing us to decode the most horrifying corners of the galaxy. Now, let us dive even deeper into the rotting heart of the Underhive ecosystem. The only tether connecting this savage underworld to the wider Imperium is the presence of the Guilders. These ruthless merchants are the vascular system of the Hive, trading essential supplies for the scavenged wealth of the depths. They move in heavily armed caravans, surrounded by elite mercenaries. To cross a Guilder is to invite total annihilation, as they control the flow of food, water, and ammunition. They look down upon Underhivers as expendable biological tools for resource extraction. You are trapped within a hyper-violent, inescapable food chain. There are only 3 classifications of existence in this ecosystem. You are either a predator, prey, or a scavenger. The predators rule through terror and extreme violence, claiming the best resources. The prey huddle in fortified settlements, paying extortionate tithes to avoid being slaughtered. Scavengers occupy a dangerous niche. They crawl through unstable ruins, risking horrific deaths to find lost technology or untainted metal to trade with the Guilders. For these scavengers, ancient technology is both salvation and damnation. Finding an intact archaeotech artifact can buy your way into a higher Hive tier, granting unimaginable luxury. But the ruins are booby-trapped with active defense grids and dormant horrors from the dark age of technology. You might find a functioning plasma generator, or you might awaken a servitor construct programmed to violently disassemble intruders. In this ecology, the darkness itself feels like a living, breathing predator. It actively conceals the myriad threats that want to consume you. Over generations, the denizens of the deep have adapted to this eternal night. Their hearing becomes hypersensitive, able to distinguish the click of Alaskan safety from the drip of toxic water 100 yards away. You learn to navigate by echo and vibration, sensing the subtle shifts in air pressure that signal an approaching ambush. The most insidious threats in this ecosystem are not the gangers or the mutated beasts. They are the unseen ideological infections. The Underhive is the perfect breeding ground for genocide cults and chaos worship. When a population is subjected to relentless misery, they will embrace any whispered promise of salvation. A genocide patriarch or a dark emissary of the ruinous powers offers exactly what the Emperor denies them: purpose, community, and the power to strike back at their oppressors. This spiritual and genetic corruption forces a horrifying realization. The Imperium views the Underhive as a quarantine zone, a necessary containment vessel for humanity's refuse. They periodically purge these depths with heavily armed enforcer kill teams or sanctioned bounty hunters, attempting to burn out the worst of the corruption. But these purges are merely a gardener pruning a diseased weed. They never cure the underlying rot. They simply trim the excess, ensuring the brutal cycle of the ecosystem continues uninterrupted. Ultimately, the ecology of the Forgotten is a self-sustaining meat grinder. It requires a constant influx of desperate souls, cast down from the upper hablocks, to feed its horrific machinery. You are born in the dark. You fight violently for scraps in the dark, and you will inevitably die in the dark. Your only contribution to the wider galaxy will be the recycled moisture harvested from your cooling corpse. This is the true, inescapable nature of the Underhive's savage ecosystem. To truly grasp the horror of this environment, you must zoom in on a single life. Imagine being born in the dark, where the concept of innocence does not exist. A child in the Underhive does not play. They scavenge. From the moment you can walk, you are taught to identify the subtle differences between edible mold and lethal spores. You learn the precise sound a rusted bulkhead makes when someone is sneaking up behind you. Your childhood is measured solely in cycles survived. You quickly realize a fundamental, undeniable truth of the abyss. Isolation is an absolute death sentence. A lone individual is nothing more than convenient meat for predators. To survive, you must find a pack. This is where the gang becomes your salvation. In a world utterly devoid of the Emperor's grace, the gang replaces religion, state, and family. They offer the only semblance of security available. But the price of admission is always paid in blood and unquestioning loyalty. Consider the brutal reality of an initiation ritual. You do not just join a gang. You are violently forged into it. The process is designed to completely sever you from whatever weak morality you once held. You might be forced to endure agonizing ritual scarification, branding your flesh with their territorial sigils. More often, you are ordered to murder a rival or a weak scavenger to prove your lethal utility. You trade your remaining humanity for the protection of their colors. Once initiated, the psychological shift is profound and terrifying. You are handed a scavenged autogun or a rusted chainblade, and suddenly, the dynamics of the Underhive change. You are no longer the hunted prey cowering in the shadows. You have become the apex predator. The gang provides a violent, intoxicating brotherhood. You fight, bleed, and kill alongside your brothers and sisters, bonded by the shared trauma of your suffocating, lightless reality. But you must understand that this newfound power is a cruel illusion. Your existence is now defined by perpetual, agonizing turf wars. You will massacre dozens of rival gangers just to control a leaking promethium pipe or a slightly less toxic water still. Every territorial gain is paid for with the mutilated corpses of your friends. You are kings of a rusted hill, ruling over a kingdom of absolute garbage while the true masters of the hive crush you from above. This is the agonizing paradox of the Underhive ganger. You fight so fiercely for survival, yet your life is already forfeit. The violence hollows you out. To cope with the relentless horror and the constant pain of unhealed wounds, you turn to cheat. Synthetic narcotics like Obscura or combat stims. These chemicals rot your mind faster than the toxic air rots your lungs, trapping you in a vicious cycle of addiction and slaughter. Now imagine the psychological toll of this existence. You become completely desensitized to suffering. The agonizing screams of a rival being thrown into a chemical sump no longer register as a tragedy. They are just background noise. You measure a person's worth entirely by the salvage value of their gear. The crushing environment strips away empathy, leaving behind only a cold, reptilian instinct to dominate and survive the next violent encounter at any cost. There is no glorious retirement for an Underhive ganger. You will never see the sky. You will not die surrounded by loved ones in a soft bed. Your inevitable end will come violently, bleeding out on a rusted metal grate in the dark, and the most chilling reality. Before your heart even stops beating, your brothers will strip your corpse of weapons, boots, and anything of value. You are born in the dark, and the dark reclaims you completely. But what if you decide to leave? It is the most logical question. Why endure the toxic sumps and brutal gang wars when a vast hive city towers above you? The cruelest trick the Imperium plays on the Underhive is the illusion of escape. You look up at the distant, impenetrable ceiling of your sector and imagine salvation. But the harsh reality is that you are sealed in a colossal tomb of humanity's own making. The physical barriers are absolute. The transition zones between the Underhive and the lower hab levels are not open roads. They are heavily fortified choke points. Massive adamantium gates are sealed shut, guarded by heavily armed enforcers and autonomous gun servitors. Their primary directive is not to manage traffic, but to enact violent quarantine. They view anyone ascending from the depths not as a refugee seeking a better life, but as a biological contaminant to be immediately purged. Now imagine you actually find a smuggler's route, a forgotten ventilation shaft bypassing the enforcer blockades. The cost of passage is astronomical. Guilders might demand a ransom of pure architect, or more likely, years of indentured servitude. You trade the immediate, hyper-violent danger of the gang wars for the slow, agonizing death of a dead slave. The psychological barrier is knowing that your life is merely a currency, entirely expendable to those holding the keys. Consider the horrifying reality of what awaits you if you miraculously succeed. You do not ascend to the noble spires. You are funneled directly into the crushing gears of an imperial manufacturer. Here, the law of the gun is replaced by the relentless, soul-crushing rhythm of the assembly line. You will work 18-hour shifts in blistering heat, assembling artillery shells for a war you cannot comprehend, until your body breaks and you are replaced. This brings us to a terrifying paradox of the Imperial Hive City. In many ways, the brutal, short-lived freedom of the Underhive is actually preferable to the absolute slavery of the manufacturing levels above. Down in the dark, you are hunted, but you are free to fight back. Up there, you are merely a biological cog in the Emperor's vast war machine. You surrender your free will for a slightly cleaner lungful of recycled air. The illusion of escape is a carefully maintained psychological weapon. It keeps the desperate masses looking upward, dreaming of a salvation that does not exist. Rather than looking round and realizing their true condition, the Imperium does not want you to escape the Underhive. They need you down there, contained, terrified, and violently culling your own numbers so the golden spires above can remain completely undisturbed by the filth of your existence. In the lower depths, the concept of wealth is fundamentally unrecognizable. You do not trade in imperial thrones or shining credits. The true currency of the Underhive is wrought and filled survival. Every single item you possess is scavenged, stolen, or stripped from a corpse. This is an economy of absolute scarcity, where a rusted water canteen or a functional rebreather filter holds more tangible value than a chest full of gold. You are living in a society that must obsessively recycle its own decay just to endure another cycle. Consider the terrifying logistics of simple nourishment. Fresh food is an alien concept, a luxury reserved exclusively for the planetary governors. Down here, your diet consists of synthesized nutrient pastes, mutant fungi scraped from toxic walls, and the most horrifying staple of all, corpse starch. When the environment itself is completely sterile, humanity is forced to look inward for sustenance. The cycle of life and death is violently compressed into an industrial process, completely stripping away any remaining shreds of human dignity. This brings us to the grisly, undeniable power of the corpse guilds. When an Underhiver dies, there are no solemn funerals or quiet mourning periods. A corpse is immediately reclassified as an extremely valuable biological resource. The corpse guilds operate heavily armored meat wagons, aggressively harvesting the fallen from gang skirmishes or starvation. To them, your dead brother is nothing more than unrendered protein and reclaimable moisture. They hold a monopoly on the dead, turning the ultimate human tragedy into a highly profitable, mechanized enterprise. Now imagine the profound psychological horror of consuming this product. You wait in line at a fortified ration dispenser, trading your hard-scavenged scrap for a block of gray, tasteless corpse starch. You know exactly what it is made of. You are literally eating the recycled flesh of your fallen neighbors, your rivals, and perhaps even your own family, just to stave off starvation. This is the ultimate, sickening compromise the Underhive forces upon you. To survive the darkness, you must willingly consume the dead. Beyond biological sustenance, the shadow economy runs entirely on violence. Bullets are a hyperdeflationary currency. You might trade a dozen solid slugs for a week's supply of filtered water, or a single, highly prized plasma cell for safe passage through a contested sector. Weapons are heavily modified, patched together from centuries of broken parts. To own a reliable firearm is to hold immense economic power. You are constantly calculating the lethal exchange rate, deciding if a target is actually worth the ammunition required to kill them. But what happens when the brutal reality of this economy becomes too crushing to bear? You turn to the illicit currency of escapism. The Underhive is flooded with highly toxic narcotics like Obscura and Spook. These drugs offer fleeting, chemical numbness, temporarily shielding your mind from the suffocating dread of your existence. However, this relief is a predatory transaction. You are willingly trading fractions of your remaining lifespan, accelerating your own physical decay, just to buy a few agonizing hours of artificial peace. The market for these narcotics is ruthlessly controlled by the most violent gang syndicates. They use addiction as an invisible chain, binding the weak and the desperate to their will. If you cannot pay your drug debts with scavenged tech, you will pay with your flesh. You might be forced into suicidal frontline combat, or worse, sold to the biosculptors for illicit organ harvesting. Your body is the final, ultimate collateral in an economy that inherently views human life as entirely expendable. Ultimately, the currency of survival is an equation that always ends in zero. You spend your health to gather resources. You spend your resources to defend your life, and you spend your sanity to cope with the horror of it all. There is no saving for the future, because the future does not exist in the sun. You are trapped in a desperate, daily transaction with death, constantly mortgaging your humanity until you have absolutely nothing left to trade. Look closely at the colossal structure of an Imperial Hive City, and you will see a perfect, terrifying microcosm of the Imperium itself. The towering spires represent the glorious, golden facade of the Emperor's realm, demanding absolute worship. But these monuments require a massive foundation of crushing misery to remain standing. You must realize that the Underhive is not a tragic accident or a glitch in the bureaucratic system. It is a deliberate, entirely necessary evil. The staggering, relentless war effort of the 41st millennium demands infinite resources and infinite bodies. To maintain the gilded palaces and fuel the endless crusades across the stars, billions must be violently ground into the dirt, their daily suffering completely ignored. The wider Imperium simply does not care about your survival in the dark, because your collective misery is the structural mortar holding those golden spires aloft. Consider the chilling, agonizing irony of faith in this subterranean abyss. In the upper levels, the ecclesiarchy preaches of the God Emperor's infinite light and his protective, watchful grace. But down in the deepest sump, buried beneath the crushing weight of 1 trillion tons of rusted plasteel, that divine light simply cannot penetrate. You are existing entirely within the Emperor's blind spot, a place so violently forsaken that even his most zealous missionaries refuse to enter. In this total spiritual vacuum, horrific heresy thrives, often not out of pure malice, but out of sheer, suffocating desperation. When the master of mankind ignores your agonizing prayers for a single drop of clean water, the whispered promises of the ruinous powers begin to sound dangerously like salvation. Chaos cults and genestealer covens easily take root in these shadows precisely because the Imperium has completely abandoned these desperate souls to the dark. Occasionally, the rigid enforcers and zealous inquisitors will descend with heavy flamers to violently purge these ideological infections. But they're merely treating the symptoms of a terminally diseased empire. You cannot burn away the festering rot when the entire structural foundation of your society is built upon it. The Underhive is a terrifying and filtered reflection of humanity's darkest survival instincts, allowed to fester unchecked because curing it would require destroying the entire hive. Ultimately, The brutal existence of the Underhive stands as the most damning indictment of the Imperium of man. It proves undeniably that humanity has sacrificed its very soul, its basic empathy, just to maintain the cruel illusion of galactic survival. Standing in the dark, you are left with one horrific truth. The greatest enemy of the Imperial citizen is not the alien or the demon. It is the suffocating, apathetic weight of the Imperium itself. When you finally claw your way out of the deepest sump and look back into the crushing darkness, you realize the most terrifying truth of all. The Underhive is not a temporary nightmare. It is an eternal, unchanging machine. The gangs will continue to slaughter each other over poisoned water. The corpse guilds will continue to harvest the fallen, and the toxic ash will continue to fall. Your endless struggle, your profound suffering, and your inevitable death down here will not even register as a rounding error in the Administratum's grand ledgers. This abyss is the ultimate, horrifying mirror held up to the face of humanity in the 41st millennium. It aggressively strips away the golden armor, the soaring cathedrals, and the grand political speeches of planetary governors. What remains is just raw, naked, and savage survival. To endure the Imperial Underhive is to accept that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no salvation, no justice, and no hope. There is only the rusted metal, the suffocating dark, and the endless echo of humanity violently consuming itself. If you have survived this descent into the dark and wish to uncover more horrifying truths of the Warhammer for OK Universe, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Which dark, forgotten corner of the galaxy should we decode next? Until then, keep your rebreather sealed. Trust absolutely no one in the shadows, and remember that in this relentless universe, the greatest monsters often wear the face of humanity.